John Pavlovitz is an author, a pastor, and blogger whose blog, Stuff That Needs to Be Said, recently surpassed 100 million views. Yes, that's 100 million. And John is out with a new best-selling book, If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk, Finding a Faith That Makes Us Better Humans. What a great title. I sit down with John coming up next.
Los Angeles. This is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
Welcome back to the show, John, and a huge congratulations on this new book.
Thank you, Areva. So good to see you and just really excited by the response to it. So thank you.
Yeah, it just came out at the end of September, and already, the sales have been amazing from what I've read, and the reviews are just incredible. I think I saw on Amazon you've already racked up like over 700 reviews, and for someone that's written a book, let me tell you, to get 700 reviews on a book that hasn't been out, but about 30 days is really impressive. Did you have any sense, John, that the response would be so incredible to this book?
Well, when you do anything and you create and you put your heart into it, you really hope that it resonates with people. And I had a feeling that it was something that would be encouraging and challenging and helpful. And it's just been wonderful to have that confirmed. So, yeah.
Well, I also know that this book started as a spiritual diary that you were writing during the pandemic. What inspired you to start keeping a diary during the pandemic?
Well, the book actually started out, it had some of the same themes, the themes that I'm always writing about, but I started writing in March of 2020, and we had the pandemic that started to unfold, and I was seeing into the summer, I was writing the book, and I saw all the high-profile murders of unarmed Black people, and the protests and the counter-protests, and then the election stuff was heating up, and I realized I couldn't write the book that I thought I was going to write. I needed to respond with specificity into what was happening. So I just turned it into a journal, a real-time exploration of what was happening, filtered through the lens of my spirituality.
So you're watching what's unfolding daily in this country from March of 20, through the end of the year. Yeah. And those daily events, those big news, media grabbing events from the murder of George Floyd and, the protests, as you said, those things were motivating you and kind of, helping you. Well, I guess I'll ask you, was your goal to help us, the readers, understand how a pastor was thinking about those events?
Well, what I started to realize was the patterns running through all the things that were happening, all the division and the hatred and the discord seemed to be coming largely from professed Christians who were white. And that really burdened me. And I wanted to speak really clearly into that moment as a way to encourage people who were also grieving it and also to confront the ugliness that we've been seeing for a long time, but especially during the past few years.
And I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to call you John. I'm going to call you Pastor John interchangeably.
Yes.
Because your career has been about, in many ways, confronting those white evangelic Christians. Just briefly for my audience that won't remember when you were on the show months ago, you started out as a Catholic, which I'm a Catholic by training, baptism and communion and, confirmation. And then you went to a big mega Methodist church, right? And then
That's right.
Left there. Well, left is a kind word, right? You were kind of fired.
I was released, as they say in spiritual worlds. Yes, being a minister, that was a surprise to me. So was raised Catholic, drifted from my faith. Later in life, started serving in a Methodist church and slowly just fell in love with ministry and left my full-time career as an art director. But as I moved up into larger churches and my profile got higher, started to feel that tension of my convictions and yet the expectations of what a pastor maybe in that context was supposed to say. And I eventually wrote and preached myself out of a job.
Okay. And a lot of what you were saying that was not consistent with this big mega church and the tenets of, I guess, the Methodist religion is that you were taking on these white Christians who were spewing lots of hate, lots of vitriol, and you said that this isn't what the Bible, this isn't what God is about.
Right. And I think there was a tension between the person I thought I was supposed to be as I followed my faith and the pastor I was expected to be, and realizing that I probably would be an authentic pastor or an unemployed pastor in that particular context, because it's difficult for people to run into the story that they've always told themselves and realize that story might not be true with regards to race or sexuality or a lot of different things in the church. And so that confrontation comes with a lot of defensiveness.
Yeah. Have things gotten better? Because you've been writing and challenging white evangelical Christians now for a while. Are they warming up to you? How are you seen in some of these circles?
Yeah, I think they're around the house right now. No, the thing about this work is you're trying to slowly move people from where they are to a more compassionate place, a more empathetic place. So I don't need people to agree with me theologically or politically, but I hope that the writing slowly moves them, and it moves some of them, and some right now are just entrenched, right? We see that there are people who refuse to acknowledge white supremacy and privilege and the dysfunction of our country, but there are some who are really wrestling with what this means for them. So you see victories in all sorts of places.
What are some of the biggest or the common complaints you hear from these folks that, oppose or, who push back on some of the things that you speak about and write about?
Well, Areva, what you see is that this religion at its worst leverages fear. So it pushes the buttons of every phobia and prejudice. And so you see people who are profoundly afraid of something, and it may not be based in reality, afraid of immigrants or gay people or Black people or whatever it could be. But often you have to cut through that story and that fear and give people a better story. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm always trying to do, give them a reality that is bigger than the religion or the politics they might have been raised in.
So is the complaint that they're afraid of Black people or they're afraid of immigrants? I mean, what are they saying is wrong with your teachings?
It's always a sense of they're complaining about, they feel a sense of loss because their religion, their politics has said, okay, you're going to lose your jobs or your security or whatever that could be. So it's always from a place they see me as a threat to them, simply because equity feels like a threat to them. Justice feels like it, because when you've been the beneficiary of privilege for so long, you don't recognize that actually helping everyone helps you too. It's not a zero-sum game.
Okay, so they kind of see themselves pitted against the world, and if Black people or Latinx people get equity, then they somehow lose, and they don't want you going around talking about giving equity or creating a more just and equitable world, because in their minds you're taking something away from them.
Right, like Jesus would have done, right? The things Jesus was preaching about and teaching it and living would have felt the same way to them. And that's because they have been so conditioned to have an adversarial faith. They always need an enemy. They always need someone to be afraid of, sadly.
Wow. Yeah. So that's deep, John. Okay. The book, God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk. The book hit the bookshelves just a few days before you went into pretty serious brain surgery. Yes. What was that experience like? So we're going through a pandemic, and then I think I read you also had a case of COVID.
Yes, we had 3 breakthrough cases, so we were fully vaccinated, and 3 breakthrough cases in our home. And when my symptoms were lingering, that's what triggered me to go and get some blood work done, which is how they found this tumor, benign tumor at the base of my brain. And so, surgery got scheduled for 3 days after my book release. So I said, I have a brain tumor and a book coming out in the same month. So it's been a really interesting time.
Wow. Oh, so I got it wrong. So the book came out 3 days after the surgery.
Sorry, 3 days before. Right. So 3 days before. So yeah, we're leading up to this big moment where you put all this time and years into this release. So the book came out, but then almost immediately I had to get ready for surgery and asked my readers and followers, would you please help amplify this book, because I'm not going to be able to. I was in the ICU for several days, 7 days fully in the hospital. And that's, as you said in the beginning, they talked about this book, they shared it, and that's how it's been, because I haven't been able to talk too much.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you weren't able to go and do like media runs or any of the things that you typically do when a book comes out. Well,
Right.
look at your followers. Look how they just showed up and showed out for you, because like I said, those reviews are just popping on Amazon, which is amazing. And the sales are just, the books are flying off the shelves. So kudos to your followers. Obviously, you've done something really good in your life, John, because they wanted to pay it forward and help you get the word out about the book. So congratulations. Now, you say something that I think is really interesting. You say we're in the middle of lives we've never lived before. Why do you say that?
Well, I think at the heart of the book and all the work that I do, it's trying to have empathy for people around us and understand that life is difficult for all of us. And the goal of people of faith, morality, and conscience should be to make life easier for everyone, to see the grief and to see the fear, and that we're all doing our best to try to get through a day that we've never been to before. And we all have these challenges. I was having surgery. You wouldn't know it beforehand, and you wouldn't be able to look at me now and to know that I'm recovering. But you can do that every day and look out, in every story that you encounter, there is something happening, and we should be sensitive to that.
Yeah. I know you said you had a benign, tumor removed, but you had brain surgery. How did you, prepare yourself emotionally for something that sounds so scary to me? I'm sitting here thinking, oh my God,
Yeah.
You're splitting your head open. So how do you prepare yourself emotionally and spiritually to go into that kind of serious surgery?
Well, part of it was, as you said, inviting my readers and my followers into the experience of being diagnosed, walking toward treatment, and now in recovery, because I get to remind them and myself that this is just the road I'm on. And I knew that this isn't a bad road or a good road. It is just my moment to respond with the best of myself. And we walked, with my family and I have just walked that as well as we can. And so that's what I knew. I knew that it was going to be great, no matter how it turned out, that we were going to just get up every day and do good work. And that helped a lot.
Wow. So the book's title, the first part, God is love, that's pretty benign, pretty innocuous. But then, don't be a jerk. That's such a provocative, it's kind of funny, tongue in cheek, but, obviously you wanted to get the attention of people. So how'd you come up with the title?
Well, I did want some of the writing to reflect my sense of humor, because people often think, everything I write about is so heavy and it's difficult to be, light in those moments. And I wanted to speak to that right away. But also, I think my aspirations for humanity had started to get really pedestrian. So I was speaking to a group of people and trying to say, okay, I don't need you to be fully loving and fully compassionate, but just try not to harm, right? Could we have a politics and a religion that seeks to not do harm to others and begin there? So at the base level of decency. So that's kind of how the title came about.
And even the chapter titles are quite inventive. The Dude Abides, Holy Ferocity. How did you come up again? Was that all a part of you wanting to show your lighter side or appeal to people who perhaps think your broader message may be a little, out of reach for them?
I think what I wanted the book to do is to disarm people and to present things in a really, maybe a different way than they've seen a particular issue, and just let them, I wanted to have a complete creative moment where this whole book was not about expectations. It was defying those and inviting people into a conversation. And so that's just a little bit how those titles came about.
Yeah. In the book, John, you're tackling some pretty big issues, some hot button issues, some, huge societal issues, and some that really challenge us to think about our Christianity and, some of the bedrock principles that we have all, as Christians, grown up with and have been taught to believe, hell. You have a whole section or chapter where you're talking, asking us to re-examine the notion of hell. Why hell?
Well, when we talk about fear in the beginning, I mean, that is one of the most profound ways that religion has manipulated people or leveraged that fear by saying no, it's not just fear of people, but it's fear of God. And so that you might be banished forever. And that fear motivates people to do a lot of things and to abide a lot of things that they might not otherwise. And I wanted to write about that and to talk about the character of a God who is love, and is that idea of hell compatible with that? Does it really make sense? And so that's a difficult thing for many people to confront. But overall, because once you have this idea of hell, if you can believe in hell, then you decide, well, who gets in and who stays out? How do they get in? And what are the ways? What are the details of this? And that's when it starts to become damaging to other people, because usually someone else is going to hell, not you.
Well, being a card-carrying Catholic, and you were once one too, hell is big.
Yes.
In the Christian faith. So are you saying that as a Christian, there is no hell? Like, where do you come down on hell?
Yeah,
purgatory. So
that's exactly what I'm saying is, for me, in examining the character of a God who is love, I don't find the idea of eternal damnation compatible with that, because the idea for me growing up, I always thought I was taught to think of God as Father. So I looked at my own children and said, okay, there's nothing my children could do that I'm going to be so upset with them that I'm going to cut them off for good. And I thought, well, then how could God, who is fully love, is always going to outlove and outforgive and outpatient me? Well, how could I get to the point where that God washes God's hands of me? And so that's just where I am. And I just invite people not to agree with me, but to wrestle and see where you come out.
Mm-hmm. And I would imagine, again, I kind of, throw that joke in there about purgatory, because that's a big thing in Catholicism. So there's heaven for the good people, there's hell for the bad people, and then purgatory right in the middle for the people who got to do a little bit more work. Not sure where it's going to be.
Yeah, and then once you do that, you end up, I think, and I touch upon it in the book, the idea of when bad things happen, you say, well, did they deserve it, or is God teaching them something? And then you're sort of psychoanalyzing God and figuring out, well, who are the bad people and why are they different from me? And I think that I want the people to understand the interdependence. We're all in this, and we're all a mess, and but yet we are all fiercely loved and worthy of love.
So, John, I agree with you mostly, I think. And, being a lifelong Christian, Catholic, it's going to take a lot for me to get over my Catholic stuff.
Yes.
And some of that is there are bad people, right? We're all a mess. I do agree wholeheartedly with that. I mean, we're all sinners. We're all a mess. But some of us are a little bit messier than others, right?
That's for sure.
They're the Hitlers of the world, for instance, people who have done horrible things.
No question.
What happens to them?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think what I look at, I try to figure out, well, where would be the dividing line between someone who's really, really bad and just a little bit bad? And so I almost can't spend too much time doing that. The only thing that I can really do is say, I believe God has given me these convictions and this morality and this set of values, and I have this space and time, and I'm going to live those as best I can and leave some of the really big, almost unfigure-outable things to God. And I'm just going to put my time and energy into being as loving and compassionate as I can, and trust that the wisdom of God will sort all that out in ways that I can't fathom.
So basically, it's not for us to decide what happens to really bad people. Let God figure that out.
Yeah,
handle that.
I often hope what I know will happen to certain people, right? So I talk about in the book, when I see, the incredible hatred and capacity for violence, I want those people to be accountable, not just here, but somewhere else. And so that's the best I can do, is say, I hope that I know that God, who is full of wisdom, will make everyone accountable. But for me, it's almost like the urgency of this day. I can't wrestle with that too long because there's so much work to do.
And so for you in your now theology, people who are judgmental, people who are judging, who are, causing so much division that we're seeing in this country, You just pray for those people. You wish them well. You empathize with them. How do you treat those people? I mean, there are clearly some people, and I hate to get on this continuum of, who's good, who's bad, but there are some people we could all agree are like horrible people, right?
Yeah, we can't, well, except for the only people who wouldn't agree are those people. Right. And the one of the patterns, as I've been sharing with people and hearing their stories and collecting stories, is that no one ever believes that they're doing something harmful, or they never believe that their motives aren't pure. And so I was at a gathering with a group of progressive Christians, and a woman stands up and she's saying, right is right and wrong is wrong, and we have to fight against them because we have right on our side, and everyone's cheering. And then I said, I believe that in this case. I believe we're on the right side of history, opposing Trumpism and MAGA and all that. But they're across town right now in a gathering saying exactly the same thing. We have right on our side, they're wrong. So the question becomes, we all have a story that we tell ourselves. Mm-hmm. And how can we get through to other people and help them see the results of their actions? Mm-hmm. So I can't ever say to someone, you're horrible. I have to say, your vote or the legislation you support or the candidates you support, I want you to see the effect of people on people, and then give you a chance to be the best human you can be. I want to give people the chance to see, and sometimes they can, sometimes they can't.
So you're asking folks to re-examine what we've been taught about, judging the person and saying, let's judge the action. Let's look at what they're doing and how their actions impact others, and then look to God, the person. I think that, that's going to be so hard for us because we're all taught, right, to put people in these boxes and categories. Yes. The good people, the bad people, the racist, the sexist, the homophobic. So we have all these adjectives that we use, and we like to think that, like the woman said at the rally, there is right and then there's wrong.
Yeah. And I think that the challenging part is that when you're raised in a certain theology or certain politics for decades, it doesn't even occur to you how twisted it is. And so the only thing that I can do, Jesus, I remember in the Gospel of Matthew's 23rd chapter, Jesus is just railing into the religious leaders, calling them vipers and hypocrites, and over, saying hard words and not stepping around anything. But I think he was doing that because not to damage them, but to show them the damage they were doing to other people. And so you can confront injustice and without assigning motive to people or without dehumanizing them. So my writing, I don't mince words, and I don't speak around, and I don't soften my language, but I try to remember that there are human beings on the other side of that, as horrible as they may treat other people.
Why do you think, John, so many people are stepping away from church? Particularly, I was going to do I haven't had a chance to, but I'm going to do a whole thing on Black church in particular, because membership attendance is way down. And, that's across all organized religion. But and a lot of people are just fed up. They're saying, the faith as a principle doesn't serve them. What's happening, you think?
I think, what we have with our technology now is we have options. We don't have just the church where we were raised. We have other voices. And so the other questions come and new tensions, but we also have different voices in our lives. And I think that is just making us less apt to be at one building for an hour on Sunday. And yet many of us still pursuing spirituality in just a very different context. And that's how I have the relationship with the people that I do, is that we are a very odd, disparate congregation. Some of these people may not be counted on Sundays in a building, and yet they're still doing the work of their faith. And so I think that's what's happening. People are seeing the institution and the flaws of that and realizing that maybe they don't need it as much as they thought they did to pursue justice and mercy and love and compassion.
But so that's one group who've left the traditional church building and they're following pastors like you online. They're going to church online. But what about those that have lost their faith altogether and now consider themselves completely agnostic? My daughter, when she was at an all-girls Catholic school, came home one year and said she no longer believed in God. And when I tell that to my friends, I've had some of my Christian friends, like freak out about it. It didn't freak me out. I was like, hey, that's what kids are supposed to do, right? They're supposed to challenge and, the beliefs of their parents. And I'm like, she's going to come back around. She grew up around, a Catholic and an apostolic. So you know what that must have been like, right?
Yeah.
So, Jesus is going to be in her life somewhere at some point in time. So I know that. But a lot of people have lost faith altogether.
They have. And yet, that's what when I get to speak in person in gatherings, and there's this really diverse group of people, and some are people of faith who are still in churches, some are no longer there, some are atheists, agnostics. And yet that idea of our shared humanity and loving one another, it resonates so fully still. So I think there's a lot of people who you may not even think they believe in a doctrine that might be religious, and yet some of those themes are always going to be there. And so my faith is always going to be a part of me. Even my Catholicism, that early upbringing, it's part of me now. And so I can push away some of it or deny some of it, and yet my mom tells me I'll always be Catholic. And in some ways that's true. I mean, this is about the story. It's not just one point in the story. Faith is about this journey from birth to death and all the places that you meander. And so I always love it, because for me, God is not threatened by my lack of faith or someone else's questions. God is not intimidated or worried about it. Only people are. And so I just trust that God always understands exactly why we believe what we believe or why we don't believe what we don't believe.
Yeah, it's funny because my daughter, this particular daughter, I have 3 kids, but she's like the most kind-hearted, generous, compassionate, caring kid you would ever want to have, almost like a model child to the extent one exists. So when she said it, like I said, it didn't bother me at all, because her walk, her manifestation speaks to everything that the Bible is and what you want more Christians to be like in terms of their walk, not just their talk. Let me ask you about some of the other themes in the book. You tackled the LGBT community, and we did a show on Lil Nas X, and he kind of lionized the concept of the devil. He did this video where he slid down a pole and gave the devil a lap dance, and gay artists like Lil Nas X, he's not the first, there have been others before him and others now who are really upending the notion that hell and Christianity and that God would banish gay people to hell simply because of their sexual preferences. How important do you think those artists are in really, in some ways, their message is similar to yours? I mean, obviously a lot more graphic, a pole dance with the devil, but
right.
A lot of similarities in what Lil Nas is trying to say and what you're saying.
I think the beauty of these days is that, in my story, I wrote a blog post called "If I Have Gay Children," and it was saying, if my children were LGBTQ, here's how I would respond as a father. And that post went viral, and it created all of this in a sense for me. And so I was doing it in a much more personal way than maybe an artist like that. But the beauty of it is those words or those ideas get released into the world, and then people get to interact with them. There is no barrier. And so that's what I love, because there are things I hear every day from every corner that frighten me or worry me or that I confront, and some things I embrace and love. And that's the beauty of it. We get to experience these perspectives, and then we all filter them, and we all reflect, and we decide, what does this mean for me? And so I think it's great. The more voices we're exposed to, it's always going to be better.
Mm-hmm. And you use a lot of personal stories, John, in the book. You set the scene in each chapter. Why was that important for you to tell those personal stories?
The heart of what I do, Areva, is to show our commonalities in the human experience, that the ideas of fear and grief are bedrock for all of us. They transcend everything, and they motivate us to do things and to believe and to vote and all these things we do. So I just want people to understand that I'm in this with them. I never want to write a book about, look at those jerks. I wanted to write a book about, I'm also a jerk, and I have my own hypocrisy and fraudulence and inconsistency. And if I can stay mindful of that, then I'm going to have a humility as I approach the world rather than an arrogance, because arrogant people who are sure that God is on their side are really dangerous. And I don't want to be one of those people.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. And so I know you've retired as a traditional pastor, like, working in a church. Do you think that's impacted your worldview? And if so, how?
I think when my pastor said, your service is no longer required here, I could have gone to a lot of different churches, but then I realized what I was gaining outside of that was the ability to speak clearly and explicitly and not worry about my particular congregation. And with that came a platform that I could speak to more people than I ever could before. So I still see myself. I remember after I was fired, the next day I said, well, I'm still going to pastor, because I'm still going to be a caregiver and I still deeply love people. And I'm going to just do that every day and see what happens. And so I have this global congregation. And so that's changed my worldview only in that it's allowed me to have unfettered experiences where no one was saying, oh, where did Pastor John go? Or who is Pastor John hanging out with? You know how that goes. And so that's been the beauty of it.
Wow. So, Pastor John, I would imagine that one thing you want people to take away from this book, like you said, is just do no harm. Don't be a jerk. But so you're asking us to be more empathetic to people, some people that we don't like, some people who've hurt us, people we don't trust. That's so hard. Like, help us, give us like some tips on how do we grow our empathy muscle.
Yeah, it's a challenge. And I write the book because I'm writing to myself too. And I think, I wrote a book called The Bigger Table. That was my first book. And then the, election happened in 2016 and everything that unfolded. And I realized maybe I don't want as big a table as I always thought. And I think the way we do this is we become students of the people around us, that we realize that there's no group that's a monolith, right? The red hat MAGAs or Republicans or progressives, we don't all believe the same thing in one group. So we get into people's stories, we get proximity with them as we're able, and just realize the uniqueness of their experience. And that's one of the places we start. I don't have a whole group of enemies. I have a whole group of people that I don't agree with on a lot of things. And if I can explore that. So that's what it is. It's looking around and having a compassion for the pain and the fear that everyone is sitting in.
And do you think that compassion or empathy, is different from loving that person? Is that the ultimate goal, that we become more loving, as humans? Or is it a more passive, I don't hate you, I guess,
I think for me, it's the idea of love means that I want good things for you. And I tell people across the aisle from me politically, I'm fighting for universal health care, not just for my family, but for your family. And I want cleaner air for you and the people you love. So it's trying to understand that we are truly interdependent on this planet. And if we can figure out how to live that way, it's going to be better. And so it starts with me. Do I see the other person as just a political opponent or just a theological difference? Or do I see them as someone who I should be invested in because their health and their wellness and shalom for them is the same for me?
You also in the book, Pastor John, talk about the utility of prayer and the value of anger. Talk a little about those two concepts.
Yeah, prayer is one of those which I understand how deeply we hold these ideas. So the idea of intercessory prayer, when someone's sick, I'm going to pray for them to get well. And as a pastor, I was always asked that. And then people might say, oh, thank you, our prayers worked. Our son got better. And I was aware that there was a person in the next room who also prayed for their family and their son didn't get better. And the way that we sort of have results-based prayer, we try to then say, well, why did God heal and not heal in this place? And it's like a GoFundMe or a God fund me, I call it. Right. So I talk about the idea of prayer because what that does is it says God's mind can be changed. It makes God very human. And so I talk about prayer that I pray now.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? You're saying
I think it's
pray and we get
what what it can do is make us say, okay, if I believe that God is saying I might heal, but unless I get enough prayers, then I'm not going to, and that makes God into a very capricious and it's a
transactional.
Yeah, it's an unsettling idea that we can sort of sway God, and yet, because people will always say to me, we need more prayer warriors or whatever. And I understand, I've always said those things or heard those things. And then I said, well, what does that mean? Does that mean if we get 15,000, God is going to heal, but wouldn't at 14,000? And it becomes a really strange idea for me. So for prayer, I don't pray necessarily that God was going to heal me. I pray that I'm going to choose wisdom and love and mercy, whether I'm sick or healthy. So I pray for me. I pray to change me no matter what is happening. So that's a difficult thing, right?
Slow down. This is like really big here.
Yeah.
You're right. Because we're all taught, like, if we pray harder, we can get, God will heal you, or God will give you a job. I mean, it even gets like really transactional, like a job, right?
For sure.
Money, or, women were, like pray for a husband.
Yes.
For that one, or pray for kids. So you're saying we should divorce that notion, or we should part ways with the notion that prayer ends up in some actual result. I
think so, because otherwise we're psychoanalyzing why God did or didn't move, and that God is trying to show you. I have a 23-year-old cousin, and he was sick for most of his life, and he had, toward the end, he got really sick, and we prayed so hard, and there was a whole community who loved him, and he didn't get better, and he passed away. So what was I to do to say, well, am I going to analyze why God didn't heal him? I couldn't do that. All I could say was, I hate that this happened, that he's gone, but I want to honor his life and live the best of myself in honor of him. And that's really the best I can do. I can't try to understand why God did this. I have the what. I know what the what is, and then I know who I am. And those are the only two things I can control.
I guess, John, I always think that, the part of why we do that, right, we're taught to do that, is that gives us hope and helps us deal with things that are unimaginable, unbearable, like someone gets diagnosed with cancer, right? And we pray for God to save them, to deliver them, to make them cancer free. And in that prayer is our hope, that helps us deal with that tragedy or that potential loss. So if we're praying and not expecting anything, will we have that same hope? I guess it's kind of...
Yeah, that's a great concept. And I experienced it. It was funny because I'm going through this surgery, having thousands of people saying, I'm praying for you. And I'm writing a book that says, don't ask for God to heal. But really, the expression of prayer, it shows a beautiful affinity, right? So it bonds us together, and it says, I'm with you and I'm for you and I'm appealing to God on your behalf. And those are all beautiful things. I just know that I have to hold the results loosely and hold onto my values and my belief in the goodness of God very tightly. So my surgery went well. I had some things that didn't go well. I have an MRI on Friday to see if they got all the tumor. I'm not going to pray that the tumor is going to magically disappear if it's not gone already. I'm going to pray that whatever news I get, I can respond in love and faith and goodness and keep going.
Because, I was getting to that, because what we're taught is that, let's say we're praying that somebody doesn't die from cancer, and then if they do die, then what our religion teaches us is to say, well, that was God's will.
Right.
And, that even with prayer, there are things that are going to happen that we can't control. So we don't feel like, we didn't necessarily, when we're angry, right, we get upset and say, God, why didn't you heal Mary or John or Bob or whomever? But in moments of more Christian clarity, I'll call it, we'll say, it was God's will, and that was what was best. And then we do go to where that person lived a beautiful life. They were, they had lots of blah, blah, blah. So I don't know. I guess I'm grappling with the notion that praying for a result creates an issue, because I think for me it creates hope, and then I quickly, revert. I can make the transition to, well, it wasn't meant to be like me. I didn't get that job. There's a better,
right.
this right. There's a bet that door closed because wait, God has something even bigger for you. So.
Yeah, and then you can take that on a personal level. We all do this, and so part of the book is saying, yeah, I don't even know how to reconcile this. I just know that there's a language that we use that we often don't even think about, right? And then you look at that in a larger perspective. People saying, well, the pandemic is God choosing to do this. And then I said, well, how can we take what's happening to millions and millions of people and figure out whatever God is saying? So that's where it's also challenging, because there is a mystery and wonder to this idea of God. And so we wrestle. Yeah. So we do pray. And I do pray, even though I don't quite want to pray in the way that I'm praying sometimes, because believe me, I had a moment in the hospital where my wounds broke open and I'm bleeding all over and I thought I was dying. And at that moment, I was praying, God, stop this bleeding, right? And so it's just the tension of what faith really is. It's messy.
Yeah, because I don't know. Do you think God has a plan for all of us, or do you like that? We're always wondering, like, what's God?
Yeah.
And I remember being taught by a nun, like, you don't want to know all of God's plan. Like, it would be too overwhelming for you because, like, if you knew you were going to lose your mother, like
Yes.
you were 20, that would be too depressing. Or
Right.
if you knew something else, like you don't want to know. You just know that there's a plan, but you don't want to know what the plan is. So do you think there's a plan?
Well, and that, I talk about that idea of God's plan, and I come down on, for instance, with the pandemic, someone said, well, this is God's plan. And I said, well, I don't know how to figure that out, but I know that part of the plan is me being here at this place in time in the history of the planet to love and care for people and to give and all those things. So I'm part of the plan and I have free will. And so whatever the plan is, it involves a lot of change and a lot of unexpected things. And so I just rest in, what can I control? I can control the person I am, the way I love other people, the work that I do. And I'm hoping that that's part of the plan and God's using it. So that's where I come down often.
Oh, these are deep issues, Pastor John.
Yeah, it's not light reading. I mean, it's lighter reading than it is reflecting. That's afterward that I think it's difficult.
Yeah, when you think about, because these principles are so ingrained in us and unlearning.
Yes.
So it's making me now have empathy for these Christian, evangelics that we're talking about, because if they've been just indoctrinated, from birth with those messages of hate and,
Yes.
hellfire and brimstone and a God that punishes and banishes you to hell because you don't look a certain way or you have certain sexual preferences, that unlearning is incredible.
It is. And, and part of what I often realize is I can't win an argument with someone's God. So if someone has been raised to believe that God is a white, cisgender, heterosexual man who was born in America, raised Christian, and votes Republican, right? If they think that's what God is, it's really hard for me to combat that in a blog post or a couple minutes. So it's all about saying, okay, you have a lot of baggage, and some of it is beautiful and some of it is not. And what can you jettison of your old faith that no longer serves you?
Right. So the last question, and this is, I guess, the biggest one, we've been talking about God, like everybody just agrees that there is a God. And for you, like how did you come to that belief that there even is a God?
Well, it really, it depends on the time of my life, the season, how I imagine that God. So for a long time, I had the same God that these evangelicals had. And now it's an idea that there is, I call it living on tiptoe, when you're a young kid and you're looking for this parade and you're trying to see over these adults and you see something that's happening, but you can't quite make it out. And I think God for me is that elusive, always just a little bit out of reach, and yet really intimate. So I see God in nature and I see God in the beautiful acts that people commit toward one another. And that's the mystery of it. I can't quite quantify it, but I feel something more than just the senses can take in. And I just lean into that. I keep searching and asking and seeking, and that's all we can do.
Wow. Okay, Pastor John, the book is If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk. If you had to just, give us like a 30-second, what is the takeaway you want people to get other than being, utterly confused like I am right now? Like, what do you want people to take away from the book?
Well, I think people of faith, morality, and conscience know that if you're a person of faith, that faith should make you more empathetic, not less. It should yield greater diversity around you, not less diversity. And so to seek that. And so at the end, I want you to wrestle with the ideas in this book. I want you to confront the questions and then not agree with me, but just move from where you are to a kinder, more empathetic place. And if we all do that, we'll be in good shape.
All right. What a interview. I've got to go wrestle.
Yeah, me too. I'm going to have to take a nap. I just had surgery.
Well, I'm going to pray. I'm sorry. I'm going to pray that the tumor's gone. I'm going to pray that you are completely healthy and healed. We pray for your healing. I want all my viewers, wrestle later, but pray now that Pastor John is healed because we need your voice. Such an important voice. We love you, and we are, I'm sorry, we're praying for you.
I will gladly accept that. Thank you.
What an inspiring conversation. Made me think a lot about my own beliefs. Growing up Catholic, you are always, always, always thinking about, what we call that Catholic guilt. And Pastor John was a Catholic too, and he's kind of walked away from organized religion, but he has this incredible congregation that follows him online, that he nurtures, that he pastors to, that he is in communication with. And so if you're looking for some spiritual guidance, I would recommend you check out his blog, you check out his books, make sure you definitely pick up this new book, God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk. It's an amazing read. It will have you thinking about your relationship with God, I think in ways that perhaps you haven't done in a long time, if ever. But it'll also lift your spirits. It'll have you very hopeful. Even though there's some tough questions in the book, it is really all about teaching us how to be more empathetic, how to love more, how to be better human beings. And you have to love a book like that. Just some words to live by before I get out. Don't be a jerk. Yeah, kind of plain and simple, right? Don't be a jerk. These are some words that Pastor John said that really resonated with me. He wrote this. He wants his legacy to be that he made the world a little bit kinder and more diverse, and that people felt really welcomed in his presence. Now, isn't that something that we all can aspire to make the world a little bit kinder, more diverse, to welcome more people that don't look like us, that don't share our opinions, don't share our views? And definitely, if we do that, we will be making the world a little bit better. All right, make sure love has the last and longest word. Those are the words of Pastor John. I'm Audra. Be safe out there, wear a mask, and remember, we are all in this together.